Now technically, you could use any glue you like to put your models together. But what options are actually out there right now that you can give you a better result and make your life a little bit easier? So stay with me to right to the end, because I have found some awesome bonus information for you. But before that, what options are actually out there right now that will help you get a better result? But also, how do you use them to get the most out of them? Let's find out. Okay, there's two main types, one that sticks and kind of one that welds. The first one that sticks things together is the good old Superglue. Now this stuff is the jack of all trades. It is awesome stuff and has loads of applications. Now there's loads of myths about it being invented on the battlefield, and most of them are just that, myths. But what's interesting though, is the original formula was invented by Dr. Coover as he was trying to build plastic optical gun sights during World War II. Now it made lousy gun sights, but it was quite sticky. However, he couldn't see an application for it at the time, so the formula got shelved. So 9 years later, Fred Joyner was working on a project to build heat-resistant canopies for fast jet aircraft. And he found Dr. Coover's formula and found it was extraordinarily sticky and it would adhere anything to pretty much anything else. And Superglue was born. Now, it was indeed used during the Vietnam War to close battlefield wounds. So it's extremely good at sticking your fingers together or your fingers to your model if you're not careful. But that also means it's great for multimedia kits. So if you're trying to stick plastic or resin or metal to each other or together, it's really good for that as well. So one thing you must remember is that any dust or grease on the surface of the model that you're trying to apply the Superglue to will dramatically reduce the strength of the bond. So make sure the surface is clean. It also bonds better to a rough surface than a smooth one. So keying the surface, making it slightly rougher, with a sanding block, for example, or a file, can make for a far stronger joint. Now, one key thing to remember is that Superglue is activated by water. Now, normally the humidity in the air is enough to activate the glue and make it start to work. And that is why it's so important to keep Superglue away from your eyes, for example, because it will do permanent damage. Now, on a side note, I was always taught, even as a kid, that if you blew on Superglue or on glue in general, then it would dry out and cure faster. But on reflection, maybe it's not drying it out per se, it's actually the moisture from your breath is activating the Superglue. That's just a thought that came to my head. If you know any different, please drop it in the comments. Now, one of the downside of Superglue is the fumes. Now, you need to make sure you're working in a ventilated area as normal safety type stuff, but also be aware that the fumes from Superglue will actually cloud or haze any clear parts you may have. So if you're trying to use it on a aircraft canopy, for example, or lights, or any clear part you're trying to use, it will make it go cloudy. Now also, if you get any Superglue on anywhere you don't want it to be, if there's a lot that's gone on there, then you can try and let it dry, then try and remove it with a sharp knife, and then try to file it or sand it down and polish it all up to get rid of that residue. Okay, so if you're working purely on plastic, then polycement is usually a good way to go. There's loads of different options here, and you can use them in different ways, which is quite cool. Now, polycement comes in 3 different types of viscosity or runniness. Now, in general, the thicker it is, then the longer it will take to cure or to go solid. Now, polycement does not stick things together. What it does, in fact, is it basically melts the plastic, so therefore when you push it together, it kind of forms a weld. And that joint can be as strong as the plastic itself. The thickest you will normally get comes in little tubes. In the good old days, this is pretty much all you could get, and you'll still find it in starter kits, for example, especially within scale modelling. The advantage of this stuff is that it's thicker. Therefore, it takes longer to cure, which then gives you a bit of extra work time to get it in the right place of where you want to be. But it will take a little bit longer for it to dry out. A downside, as you can see here, is that the nozzle is not exactly precision, and it can be very difficult to control the flow. So one way you can fix this is by decanting some of the glue and using an old paintbrush or a spare piece of sprue to apply the cement to where you want it to be. Now the next type is liquid polycement. Now this stuff comes in little jars or little bottles like this, and you apply it with a brush. The other type is also the same sort of stuff, same sort of viscosity, but it comes with a small needle applicator like that. Now I find that this stuff especially is kind of the workhorse for most of the things I do. Now it is runnier than the tubed cement, so you need to be careful with it, and it will flow. Because it's thinner than the tube cement, it will dry faster, but you still have a bit of work time as well to get things to where you want it to be. While the super thin nozzle makes accurate application a lot easier, they can get blocked comparatively easily. So after every application, bang the base of the glue to bash the glue back onto the bottle, and it will help to keep the nozzle clear. Now this stuff is still polycement, but it is extra thin. Now this stuff is made by Tamiya, and that's the one that I use. There are many like them out there, but this stuff is awesome when it comes to small parts, or especially joints that are going to be very, very visible. Now this stuff is so thin that you hold the two pieces of the model together and you just dab the brush at the joint. You don't need to wipe it across, just dab the brush on the joint, and the capillary reaction will draw the cement all the way through the joint to where it needs to be. Therefore it is awesome for visible areas, as it's much harder to put too much on, which would then squeeze out into areas you would not want it to be, and potentially damage the plastic. Now the one thing I'm loving about this series is that the more I explore this hobby, the more things I find. It's great. So even things you thought you knew all about, I'm finding new stuff all the time. So while I knew that superglue and poly cement could cloud transparent pieces, especially if you get it on your fingers. Now I have seen people use PVA glue to glue transparent parts on models, but I always tended to use, for example, like the Tamiya extra thin, and try and be really careful with it. But when I was researching for this video, I came across something that was termed as Canopy Glue. Now one example is this stuff. Now it appears there's tons of different options out there from different manufacturers. This stuff is designed specifically for clear parts. Now I do not have any. I have not tried it. I've only just heard about it, but I found it really interesting. So I'm going to have to try and get hold of some so I can try and test it out. But do you have any other tips or tricks? We'd love to discuss it with you, so please drop it in the comments. Anyway, now they reckon that most superglue made is reportedly never actually used. So when you're finished, tap the base of the container to stop the glue drying in the spout. Wipe the nozzle with a cloth to prevent it from clogging up, and also helps you to put the lid back on again. And then put the lid on to keep the air out. Bonus number 2 is that the strength and characteristics of liquid polycement can differ between manufacturers. So if you buy a different brand to what you're used to, test it first to get your head around how strong it is and how it flows and everything else. The dregs in your Tamiya super thin can be difficult to get hold of as the brush is too short. So what people often do is that they just decant the dregs into a new bottle and then go from there. But if you use a pair of pliers, you can pull the tip out. And then replace it very gently, a little bit longer, and there you go. You can now reach the bottom of the jar. So if you found that useful or you learned something new, please bash that like button. It really helps us out and helps us to reach new people who can then come and join the Flying Raven community. So I will see you next time on this video as Ben and I explore the world of miniature modelling. So I'll see you later. Take care. Bye.